Thank you all for being here this afternoon. We're here for another edition of Her Point of View, which is presented by the Female Quotient, who happens to be a fantastic partner of the Pro Sports Assembly. But first off, my name is Keisha Wyatt. I'm with the Dallas Mavericks. I'm also a founding board governing member of the Pro Sports Assembly. And so I'm really happy today to just kind of introduce you to a dynamic, they don't work together, but we all work together in some kind of way in sports. But they are a duo in regards to just what they have done in regards to being trailblazers in this industry. No pun intended, Jen. But ladies, the floor is going to be yours, Melanie and Jen. Thank you all for participating in today. I'm really appreciative. And so looking forward to this conversation where we learn about some new pathways to progress. So ladies, bye everybody.
Thanks, Keisha. So thank you. This is going to be a fun hour. I think, Jen is an amazing woman and she's done amazing things. And I, as I saw and posted in my LinkedIn space, like I snuck my way in here. So I'm really pleased to be on the receiving end of just kind of picking your brain and asking some questions. I am recently the Vice President of Social Responsibility for Major League Baseball. I'm starting a new adventure next week, which is pretty exciting for me, and I'll be supporting some equity work at that organization. But Jen, why don't you give us the whole elevator pitch and tell us about yourself?
Thank you so much, Melanie. I am Jenn Hunter. I am the Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Portland Trailblazers. I've been in my role for about 3 months, came over from the college athletics space, and so I spent time at the University of Wisconsin, Brown University, UC Berkeley. Spent a little bit of time, I've done a little bit of everything. I've been a high school teacher at some point back in my hometown in New Orleans. I have worked with NFL teams, NBA teams with the Rockets when I was a wee babe interning, and those grassroots that we have. And so this for me is just kind of like a homecoming to be able to be back in the NBA and get to do this intersectional work between diversity and sports. So I'm excited.
Awesome. And so Keisha mentioned it. So our task for today in our hour, we are to provide insights and advice on navigating the diversity, equity, and inclusion building in pro sports, and share visions for the future. And so I think it's important always when we start these conversations to level set, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. What do the three terms mean to you?
So obviously diversity, that's our easy piece, right? That's that representational kind of optics piece. We have all of these different folks represented in the space. Inclusion. All right, we have these folks in the space. They get to share their thoughts and their ideas. Great. May not be used, but they can share them. Then the equity comes is how do we then take these ideas, these experiences, these differences, and then incorporate them into our policies, our strategies, our outreach. That's where that equity piece really comes, is those everyday moments, spoken or unspoken, seen or unseen, that we know that we have thought through all of these processes to make it a part of what we do. So that's what the difference for me in the three.
Yeah, and I love that. And I didn't tell you I was going to ask that question, but I'm sure
you didn't
always expect that question. But I think about it as well, same as you, right? Diversity is differences, things that are categorized, some things that can be seen, some things that can be not seen. And you and I have talked about differently abled folks, and people think right now, they think diversity so much is race and gender, right? Those are the hot topics. But we've talked about like neurodiversity, and are people in your organization on the spectrum, are people in your organization? I think you had mentioned, working in this industry and just in this space for a long time and really not seeing people who are differently able. And I think we can all attest to that, having been in sports. And, I've been in sports for 15 years or so, and you have a great history. And I worked for the Baltimore Ravens for a while and Major League Baseball for a while. And there's so many types of differences that people cannot lose sight of what diversity really means. So I appreciate you kind of doing that level set. But equity is that word. I think you and I love that word. And so I wrote down this question because you and I have talked, and in recent conversations, you mentioned equity in resources is not the same as equity in impact. So equality, I think I quoted you, equality of opportunity does not equal equality of outcome. Yes. I love it. It's so true. So I'd love for you to kind of give some insight to the group. What do you mean even further as you talk about equity and the investments that you're making at your organization in that respect?
So it's interesting. Equity makes people uncomfortable, and not uncomfortable in a bad sense, but uncomfortable in, am I doing the right thing, right? So a lot of times we're like, okay, we're going to be equitable. I'm going to give $10,000 to these groups, right? Maybe it's a Black group, maybe it's a non-able, group, maybe it's a LGBTQ plus group. I'm going to give all of them the same resources, right? But all of those different groups have different needs. That non-able group may need something in your facility or in your organization that may cost a tremendous amount to make it an equitable experience for them, right? Maybe you don't have, the type of accessibility. Maybe you don't have doors that have, automatic doors, things that's going to cost a lot of money to change. Whereas in your organization, in terms of outreach to your Latinx community, that $10,000 may be sufficient. If you're only putting that same 10,000 and you know that it's going to cost you 200,000 to fix that, you're not being equitable. Your heart's in the right place. All right, I want to give money to these things. But the reality is, a lot of times when people are entering into this DEI space, they're not comfortable with saying, I need to actually put more money towards this group than this group at the time. And so when I think about the outcome part of that, those outcomes in that example will never be the same. And that non-abled group is not going to get what they need because you were trying to be equitable by giving that same amount of resources. And so what I really want organizations, and this is tough, organizations are in different places in this journey too, right? In that DEI. Some of y'all are just at the D of like, y'all don't even have the diversity. So we can't even talk about E and I because we haven't even gotten to the D, right? So the diversity piece, needs to be addressed. But let's say that you're in that inclusion space, then you're really trying to take it to the next level of that equity. You have to start planning, what do I want my ROI to be from an outcomes perspective? What is my equity ROI? And so that is where I really want organizations to start thinking of, how can I use these resources to make sure that my impact is equitable for all of these groups?
No, I love it. And the inclusion part, there are intentional acts. But like you mentioned in the very beginning, sometimes it's just the act and doesn't mean that it's going to, come. It's great that you asked me to be in the room, but did you listen to me? Did you do the things that are required? So it's such a vast world. I mean, DE&I is a vast world, and some people, it's DEIB, right? It's diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, right? So like you mentioned, everyone is on a journey. I think a lot of people in this space want to see things happen so quickly. And, I shared with you, right now, it's hot, right? If you look on job postings, you probably got a ton of emails, a ton of, do you have any recommendations? I'm starting a D&I position here, or DE&I here, ID&E here. If you lead with inclusion first, I know you're getting lots of emails and LinkedIn requests and all those things. And a lot of folks in this space are, whether it's to lead the work at an organization, consult for an organization, or join a board of an organization that never had diversity. Right. And they know people are paying attention right now to their lack of diversity as it relates to being a funder. Yeah. So I had a friend who recently took a job as a head of, DE&I, and she wrote to me and I said, how's that job going? And she said, you know what, I left because it was really an optics role with no intentions or resources. So for you as a leading DE&I practitioner, what are people who are in this space, how do you know it's real? How do you know that the organization is going to be intentional and provide you with support versus I need to do this because people are looking at me and told me I need to do it? How do you know it's real? As a person who is leading in this space, for the folks on the line who are, some of them have been tasked to take over this role in addition to their role because of who and what they look like. Let's be honest.
Be honest.
Right? And how do you know it's real? And do you care because you think you can make a change?
Oh, that is a loaded question. So I'm gonna start in a couple of places. And I've been on both sides of the spectrum. I've been in my previous roles, I created those DEI spaces. So there was nothing, built everything from the ground up. At the root of everything, and this is what I love about the Trailblazers, is that buy-in is at the very top. So looking at your reporting line structures, looking at where you're going to sit in the organization. Do you have accessibility? Will your recommendations make it to your CEO or to your president? If there is no way for your recommendations to make it to your CEO or president, you're not going to move the needle the way in which you want. So I've been in organizations where I've had that. I've been in organizations where I haven't had that. I have had resources everywhere that I've gone. And that's a key piece in terms of moving the needle. The things I think that are difficult, and you brought up the B. So in this optics space, people want to do all of these things externally. My organization is doing a great job and has allowed me to kind of come in and take what they've started and move it along. We focus on the belonging. You can do all of this DE&I optics work and all of this external work. You can be in every community of color, every LGBTQ plus community, every, non-abled community. You can do all those things. But if the people that are working in your organization are not fulfilled, do not feel heard, do not have a voice. I live in Portland. We don't have to sugarcoat it. This is a very white town. But we have a Black employee network. We've launched the expansion of that with our Asian employee, our API employees, our Latinx employees, our women's group. Like, we're creating those spaces of belonging. And the way that I've structured our groups is that those are not ally spaces. Those are spaces for that identity, for them to talk about their experiences that is unique and related to them. It's not a fishbowl opportunity. It's an opportunity for them to grow. And I've promised that I keep everything that is said in those groups anonymous and private. But the message that I've gotten so far from the first interest meetings was just the gratitude of having that space for them. And that to have an organization that cares enough to give them that space. And we don't think about this, like, people don't think you don't know what your staff of color are going through. You don't think about your Asian staff right now. Look at the world, the xenophobia we're dealing with right now. What is your Asian staff feeling when we're not in the office, but for people that have to go to the office, and you're in communities where they're attacking people that look like you for nothing. And so that's an experience that person may have a fear of just coming to the office, like, who's talking to them? So that belonging piece, I think, is really important, but you need resources to support those groups. And you need leadership that's going to understand the value and the importance of the group and how it contributes to the growth of the organization.
Well, I want to dig into this space that you just talked about, because you said it, and I think people's ears perked up. Did you hear what she said? She said that the BRG, ERG groups that she has are for the group. It's not a fishbowl opportunity. And I want to dive into that, because I think so many of organizations out there, and this is not a bad thing, there's no passing of judgment here, but I want to understand how you got buy-in to make it a very singular focused. I was chair of MLB Women for a number of years when it got started. I loved the group, but we had men who were part of the group. They were allies to the group. And so for the folks who are listening, who are leading the space, a member of this space, whether as a person in the population or an ally, talk to us a little bit about the direction you took to say, this needs to be a safe space, and how you've navigated that group so that it does not become a session where you say certain things. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yes.
Not that kind of session.
Yeah. So, one, we have an ally group. So whenever I send out the invitations, like right now, for some of the newer groups, we are in the initial interest groups, people come together, you meet one another, et cetera. And in that email to those that have registered, it's like, if you registered for this group and you are not in this identity, please join the ally group, because we're very clear. It wasn't difficult to get buy-in. Very thankful for my leadership, and this isn't like a kiss butt type of thing. I'm really blessed for the leadership that I have, incredibly blessed that this was not an uphill battle to let occur. for me personally, why I used to feel like that, like, okay, well, we should allow, allies in the space. But what ends up happening is that it becomes a traumatic experience for the person that holds that identity. And we've all been here. I've never met a person of color that has shared their story that doesn't have the same example that I'm about to give. So you tell your traumatic story to this group with allies, and the ally goes, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. And then how do we respond? It's okay. You didn't do it. I know that you're not that way. And so now we have shifted my traumatic experience to now making the ally feel safe. And then I have not gained anything other than sharing my traumatic experience with no solution to what's next. And it's not an intentional thing. I have never met anybody that has, and there's probably some allies on the call like, oh my God, I've done that to people. And that's the reality. And after summer 20 was the hardest summer for me. I'm 37 years old. I'm a mother. And I have not to this day seen the George Floyd video. After Alton Sterling got killed and I accidentally saw the video in 2016, I vowed that I would never watch somebody lose their life at the hands of police, or just really period. But I'm very empathetic. And so the thought of that fear, I don't do. So I never watched the George Floyd video, but I heard enough about it. And the part about him crying out for his mother as a mother hurt me. And I was like, I don't want to share with people how this feels. I just want to hug my daughter and I want to love on my daughter. I don't have the capacity for any I'm sorry's. I don't have the capacity. Like, I cannot do it. And then I still got to do my job, right? So like, in that moment, still having to have these listening sessions. I was working at college, so doing all those things. And that was the moment for me that I was like, people need their spaces, because that community, I can't explain the relationships with the community, but it's just natural. It is when, for some of y'all got on this call a little bit earlier and Keisha's on this call. And the first thing that I was like, oh my gosh, you look so cute. Your hair looks great. Like that is that Black sister girl community piece that we have naturally. And if I go into a group with Latinx folks, they're going to have their things that they connect with naturally. Like that's okay. And I think that we have not allowed people to be okay with just bonding with your community, because your community is the first place you go in those trauma moments. And so that's really my rationale of providing that individual space. And so the way that I manage it with the BRGs is ERGs and other places, affinity groups and other places. I've asked every group to create like a chair, and then I liaise with the chair. And so we can bring, if there's issues within that group that they want to bring to the organization, they can anonymously bring it and protect the employees. So we just really thought through the structures of how to get voice and help the business be the best business that we could be, but then provide that space respectfully. So that's how we do it. And my why is a personal feeling that I just know I need for myself.
No, I appreciate that. And I love when you were talking about that, somebody wrote in the chat, like somebody said, I get that. And I was listening to a podcast. So I like the Harvard Women at Work podcast, and they will delve into race a lot. And so they recently had 3 Black women on the podcast to talk about their experience, what has changed in 2020, and what progress have they seen. And each person's story was different. Some were really progressive depending on the industry which they worked, and some were not. But to your point, one woman said something to the like of, my traumatic experience is not the show for you to watch. Right. And I think you kind of spoke to that. So I have a ton of questions, but I actually was going to ask you this question, but somebody put it in the chat. So, I like the idea of an ally group, though. I'm a member of our Pride group. She's a lesbian. I would appreciate our ally members, but also would like to have a gay only space. And so this was one that I was thinking about before, because sometimes your diversity is not physically visual, right? And so you may be LGBTQ plus, but have not made a show, people do not know it casually. Mm-hmm. And so if the organization, if the ally group, or if the affinity group, ERG, BRG, is only for people who are LGBTQ, and then there's an ally space, are you not in a position to kind of say, well, I want to be part of the gay only space, but I don't want to like make a big deal? It's a very interesting piece. That's why I kind of asked you to delve into it. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so our Blazer Pride is only for members that identify. And in our first meeting, I was very clear of everybody's at different places in their journey. I've been in organizations before where people did not feel comfortable being out. And so and what's great is most of the people that come to the group have that understanding. So who's in this group? I'm the only non LGBTQ identifying person that knows the membership of this group.
Okay.
And so if they choose to join the ally, like you have the option in any of the BRGs to be in our ally group. And if they decide to do that and share, then that's fine. But it's not required for them to be kind of in the ally space. So if you want to be in that LGBT in our Blazer Pride group and not join any others, that's fine. But there is not an opportunity for folks to come in there. And if you want to stay, you want that to stay personal to you, like you can do that. And that's a reality. And I have been at places, and it is one of the things that hurts me. And I think that there's some generational things that will shift. But for older generations in the workplace, a few of my employees that were older and identified as LGBTQ plus did not feel comfortable being out in our organization, and they could hide it, obviously, but that's sad. And that's sad that we have an organizational culture that you feel that you can't be that, but that's the reality of the world. And so that's why for me, that space is important, because if I'm not out, like, I don't need allies in the group, again, like consuming my story to go and share and talk to someone. So people are understanding of that. So that is, but that's also going to help someone in their journey, right? Of like not having those allies in the group. So that's the second part of it, is like, how do we help folks in the journey? I can take it a step further, thinking about like Asian communities. That's a very wide diaspora. So you have, your Japanese, Korean, Chinese, you have your South Asian, you have, our Pakistani, Indian, like that's a wide breadth of folks. So when that group comes together, and then taking it a step further in America, we have large biracial Asian populations, adopted Asian populations. And so all of these different factors come into a space, but together, that group allows everyone to grow. So there's something for everyone. And so just being intentional in the importance of that group not having allies in it, because each group has different needs. So I hope that answers the pride question.
No, it does. Absolutely. I just love the way you think about this work. I love the journey that you've taken to get to this work in sports. And so maybe you did your 1 minute elevator pitch at the very beginning, but maybe let's give people what they want. Let's talk a little bit more about who you are, Jenn. And you mentioned the community, like the sister girl community. And so I was going to delve into you went to an HBCU, I went to an HBCU, and you and I have connected in that space. And so why don't you tell us your journey as you've now kind of moved into this space in sports?
Yeah, I have always knew that I wanted to work in sports. This is a terrible story, and I really hope nobody from the Saints is on this call. My journey in sports started my senior year of high school. Again, I said I'm 37. So at this point, it was just like Ask Jeeves or Alta Vista, whatever the search engines were in like the late 90s, early 2000s. So I called the Saints and I said, hey, do y'all have volunteer opportunities? Back then, you could just like call and someone would like transfer you to community. And they were like, yeah. Now, I told them that I was a freshman in college. I was actually a senior in high school, but they let me come. It's so awful. I tell the truth now, y'all. I'm a very honest person now, but I was a kid and I was highly ambitious.
Nothing wrong with that.
But it opened the door for me to get into sports. And so like, I was able to work at training camp. Like I was able to work, punt, pass, kick, like that. So here I was like 17/18 years old, as this volunteer, like getting all of this like entry level experience by just picking up the phone. And so I knew that I wanted to like keep this career in sports. Real story is that I wanted to play football. I wanted to be like Charles Woodson. I thought I was going to be the first woman in the NFL. I'm 5'4". So people say I present tall. I'm 5'4" on my best day, didn't grow much. So that dream I had to kind of put aside, but I knew that the career in sports was something for me. And so I am a graduate of Howard University, not too far from where you went to school up the road.
That's right.
So you have two.
Morgan.
Go ahead, Morgan State, represent.
Yes, I represent, I'm a Bear, Morgan State University, Baltimore.
Someone in the chat just said they pinned me as at least 6 foot, 4 feet tall. I mean, 5'4" on a good day. Deceptively tall is what I like to say. But yeah, so I went to Howard. I was, interning, 19 years old. I would go back to Houston, where it's my second home, and interning with the Rockets. Shout out to Sarah Joseph. She literally whipped me into shape and was one of the best leaders and women leaders that I'd ever had. And so, did other internships, worked at other organizations. After college, it was 2005 when I finished undergrad. And so I took a project. Somebody said the real HU, I took a, I took a class. I took a job with the NBA, a contract position with All-Star Game. And that was where at the time in events and attractions in the NBA, there were all of these women and women of color in powerful positions. They were lawyers. Gail Hunter, I believe, is who was there at the time. And I knew I was going to law school. So we knew that was going to happen. And so I did it for that year. And then I went on to law school, and then ended up circumventing through college. Thought I was just going to go to law school and loop back into the pros. Not easy to do. Once you get out, you better prepare yourself that you may not be able to jump back in. But went to law school. My last semester of law school, I took a class on public education policy in the United States. And it wasn't until that moment that I realized how privileged I actually was. I went to public schools, but my trajectory was because I happened to go to one of the best magnet schools in my city. And had I not went to that, I wouldn't have had an opportunity to be at a Howard. I would have probably still back in New Orleans, whatever. But that class is what opened my eyes to equity and inclusion, because I believed up until my last semester of law school that if you work hard, if you do the work, you can just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It had never occurred to me 3 years into law school that there were systems and policies that were put in place since this country started that made the path to success hard for people until I took this one class. That is the only law book that I have to this day, is that public education and policy class. And so I knew I wanted to work. I wanted to do something to change that. And so that is how I actually became a high school teacher. My dad was livid. He was working at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Houston. So he was not happy that I just spent 3 years in law school to turn around and go teach high school. And that took me further into the DEI space, because now I'm seeing the inequities. I'm seeing the things that my magnet school didn't provide. I'm seeing schools that couldn't afford books, right? Like, this is a reality. And so we can't talk about, so when we talk about those equitable, using resources for equitable outcomes, it's very different for a lot of people. So that's kind of like my journey of how I ended up. I ended up back in sports when I ended up on the college side. I started off doing academics and then moved into this DEI space working at Berkeley. But it was my life experiences and that one moment in that class that really shifted my whole thought process.
I love that. And I've shared my story to a million times, but we have similar paths, except I'm not an athlete and did not think I'd be a football player nor any kind of athlete, because I have no skills whatsoever. But I made those phone calls back in the late 90s, just like you. I'm 42, and just made the phone calls. Hey, want to come by, just shadow you for a day? That's what you did back in the day. And people would say yes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, what? This is okay, great. And I did that with the Washington football team, not their name, back in 1999, but did that and worked game days and, worked hard. The next year I went and asked the Ravens to do the same thing. And they were like, sure, come on over. And that was all she wrote. I quit my full-time job after college, got my master's in sports administration. One of my favorite classes was sports law. And I think we're here. This is probably why they asked us to talk to one another. Like I loved that class. I mean, we can talk about Title IX and all those things, gender related.
Oh yes,
as well. there's so many things, so many pieces of the DE&I conversation. And so I love your story. I love the passion, love that you are where you are now, because you're where you're meant to be.
Right.
And just, so appreciative of what you've done to get yourself here. So I got a question coming in through the chat, and I have more questions for you, but I want to make sure I do this in real time so I don't get backed up. When you're the only person of color in an organization or focus area, how do you recommend navigating how to shoulder the burden of educating the masses on your culture? When D&I is a prominent initiative of the organization, and you're probably tired, you're exhausted. This for you and I, my work is corporate social responsibility, social impact. This work, it's everyone's job to think about DE&I, and we could talk about that as well, because it's everyone's job.
Yes.
Everyone's job in your work. As a funder, I will look at the board of directors and the leadership. If you are supporting young Black children and there's nobody on your board who is a person of color, and everyone on the staff is a white woman, that's not the best funding opportunity for me. So it's everyone's job, but I'm not a subject matter expert. You are. You're a leading practitioner in this space. And so for people who are either in this job where, you do have to shoulder the burden of it because it's part of your job. What about people who are not and just happen to be the Black person, the woman, sitting around the table or not sitting on the table? How do you shoulder that burden?
My answer to this has really shifted over time. We all have a duty to take care of ourselves. And this is a conversation particularly for Black women. So I'm speaking to Black women on the call here. Black women are dying from weathering. We're dying at young ages. We are dying from maternal health issues. And we are the cleanup woman. There's an old school song, I believe is Betty Wright.
Betty Wright.
Betty Wright, the cleanup woman. But that has become what we are to organizations, is that cleanup woman. I'm in this role, so I know what I signed up for. All right, so I'm going to do that. But I got to a place where I take the time that I need to process when it's something really major. I give myself that opportunity to cry. I give myself the opportunity to feel before I go into fix it mode. But for those that aren't, you need to give yourself the space and feel comfortable to tell people, I'm not an expert on this. And I don't feel comfortable being the one to speak for everyone, number one. Number two, there are people on this call from Clark, Atlanta. We saw a real HU, which I hope was Howard and not Hampton because y'all play those games. Morgan State. Black people are not a monolith. Latinx folks are not a monolith. Asian folks are not a monolith. And so none of us theoretically can truly speak for the whole, diaspora, right? I think that there's some general things that we do share as a community, but it is not your burden to educate those people uncompensated. Now, if they're talking about compensation, consider it, but it will take so much energy from you trying to carry your organization and then simultaneously see your organization not trying to get more diverse, not changing hiring practices, not bringing in consultants. And so what I say to people is, if you feel like you're comfortable with sharing your stories and having to consistently be that fishbowl person, then cool. But for those that don't, find that strength to say, like, this is not my area, but maybe I can recommend some consultants or some people that can come in and talk to you on this. Because just because you're Black does not mean that you can do this DEI space. Just because you're Latinx does not mean that. Just because you are a woman or you identify as LGBTQ+, it's not. I'm Black. I check myself very often to make sure, even in the work that I'm doing, it's easy for me to just go down a Black road and do all things related to Black folks. But everybody needs that. I have a deaf stepmother. So when I think about what, her experiences are, we work in sport. She can't hear anything that's going on in the game. So what is that experience like for a deaf person? So like, at our organization, in our arena, we have Braille on our, on all of our signage, right? Which a lot of organizations do, and that's great, but those are small things. So I can't always think through the lens of myself. And so check yourself and humble yourself of like, you know what, I don't know anything about DEI, so I'm not gonna lead this organization and recommend them to somebody that can, because they'll spend the money on other consultants, so.
Agreed. And that's a great point. I love that you said that. So there's a couple more questions coming in. I don't want to spend too much time going back to it because I like the direction that you move in with this space of the singular focused ERGs and the allied groups, but I don't know that everyone fully got an understanding that you have allied groups. And so the question that came in, how do you want allies who want to help and engage with underrepresented groups if they're unable to be part of the discussions that take place? But you didn't specifically say that. You said we do have allied groups. So I want to make sure I give you the space to answer that question.
Yeah, so the BRGs are a separate space, right? Like that is for, my Black employee. Actually, we have one tonight. We have Latinx tonight. That is just for that group. The ally group is for everybody. So if you are you might be in the Latinx BRG and then join the Ally Council. It's completely up to them. And we have a lot of people in the organization that have signed up to join. So you're going to have that diversity within that. However, to the point, I've already thought about that. Let's say that the ally group was all white. It won't be, and it's not. But let's just say that it was. That's with my experience as the DEI practitioner. There is a curriculum, there is training, there's real conversations, real discussions that are planned throughout the year for that group. Also, that group, when there is, we'll use the insurrection as an example, but like right after that happened, if there's some kind of major like life situation that comes up, I'm going to have a listening session for that ally group to come together and just talk through their feelings and what's going on. And so in my organization, I never worried about there being diversity in the ally group because people understand that intersectionality exists. So like I'm in the Black Employee Network, but I want to support my Latinx and my Asian and my Pride brothers and sisters. So I'm going to be in that ally group to support them. So you never really have to worry about that if you're building that culture of I'm going to give you your space, but also let's come together in this space because it's bigger than just that. And so we're fortunate in my organization that we have folks like that. So that rolled very smoothly in terms of rolling that out.
That's great. Thank you. Your organization, let's talk about that a little bit, right? You've certainly said how the Trailblazers are a trailblazer in this space, and you're happy to be there. It's been, are you 4 months in now? How many months are you in?
Yeah, like 3.5. Like
I'm rounding
baby.
up. I'm rounding up. I'm rounding up. So obviously, the Trailblazers have prioritized diversity, equity, and inclusion, and kudos, and huge kudos to them. So you probably had strategies at the end of November or whenever you started that they were like, okay, as a result of X, we want you to do Y. Has anything shifted in the 4 months that you've been there? How has the work been thought of from an executive level? You came in, you were the first, right?
No.
Oh, great.
I am actually, so this is what's amazing. This is my first role when I'm not the first.
Great.
And that's great. A lot of times when you're the first in the role, you are the one that I like to say is cutting down the trees, right? You're starting to pave the path. So that part has already been done in our organization. Those foundational things, laying out the business case of why this is important, getting, groups on board, getting people to understand. And now that we've like paved that path, now I'm like building the community on that road, right? And so we are now in like our phase 2. So, in the process of, I just wrapped up our strategic plan for the next 4 years. And, we're going through that process and the conversations that we'll have with a lot of folks. But it's taking what we started and now like taking it to the next level, right? And how can we really have long-term impacts, long-term sustainability? How do we look at you think about supplier diversity, we all struggle there, and a lot of times we want to say, well, let's just make sure we have supplier diversity. Have you looked at your suppliers? Are they diverse? What does their tier 2 chain look like, right? So really starting to really take our organization to the next level of like, we started here. Now, how can we make sure, because we have the leverage, I'll talk about Nike. Nike does a really great job, and I think you alluded to this as well, of looking at who's on their boards and who's a part of their organizations before you have that partnership, right? And so if you are really committed to diversity in DE and I, it is beyond your organization. And it needs to be a long-term, like a domino effect, essentially, of everything that your organization touches. You need to make sure there is that connection and that alignment to your DEI values internally. And so that's where we are in this space. So no, I wasn't the first. There was an amazing young woman in this position before me. And then I have an amazing SVP, Ashley. She is phenomenal. Also a HBCU grad. I saw a Clark Atlanta person on here. And she had this vision and this wherewithal to expand. So we have somebody in our organization who just started this week. Our dear Larissa, she is our DEI manager, and she's really focused on kind of that teaching component internally, right? And our ally council and all that curriculum and the internal growth we need, that's going to be kind of her baby. And then I really can focus on the strategy, the policy, the community engagement. Here's the other piece for folks. Do you know your Chamber of Commerce across all the different ethnicities? You need to know those people. The community piece, we always get caught in the youth space. You have a good place to start thinking about colleges and there are a lot of teens on the call. Generationally, how are you engaging with this kind of 18 to 30 age group, right? Like they're your upper bowl people. How are we starting to work with that group to start to get them in the lower bowl when we know they rather watch a game from home, right? And so we talk about race, we talk about, gender, LGBTQ plus, able body. We have to talk about generational diversity.
Age. Mm-hmm.
For folks in college, they rely very heavily on donor dollars in order for their athletic organizations to run. But those old dollars, this sounds really harsh, but I'm very direct, but eventually those people are going to die off. And so if you haven't engaged in this new donor base, having them give $25 to $50 a year so that $25 to $50 turns into $25,000 to $50,000, you have to start engaging them early. So this DEI work is beyond just race and inclusion, but like in all of your organizational structures, what does that marketing video look like? Is there diversity in your packets that go out or on your website? When I go to your community, are all the kids white? And you might be in a white community, but you better be really intentional of how that looks because people are looking at that externally. So yeah, I am fortunate to be in a lot of spaces. It keeps me incredibly busy. And in a Zoom world, I'm like, wow, I've never had this many meetings in my life. But I'm so grateful to be in all of these spaces because it is that growth in our organization and that teamwork is just phenomenal what we've been able to start putting out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. My boyfriend is a chief development officer, and we talk about donor stewardship and cultivation all the time, but it really is stewardship and cultivation of all of your partners, internal, external, all your stakeholders. Like, are you stewarding them from what they think is here to moving them along this journey, along this path? And again, that is everyone's job. It is everyone's job. Now, you're the subject matter expert, but everyone should be thinking about that as part of your organizational values, right? There's questions piling in here.
Yeah.
Let's see. You said you report into an SVP. What's the function that you report into? What's the business function?
So my SVP is over community communications and DEI.
Okay.
So very wide breadth. And I sit on our leadership team. So I can say everything that needs to be said in the moment. So I'm fortunate in that there's always those conversations necessary. I don't ever feel that if I make a recommendation, it dies there. So
good. It's a fascinating thing. So just regardless of sports, I know we're talking about sports, but publicly held corporations, if you look at the work, this space can report into a number of different areas. It can report straight to the CEO or, whoever you are that leads your team or any other corporation. Sometimes it reports into HR, sometimes it reports into comms, all those things. And so one of the questions we have is on employee engagement. And that's why I asked you who you reported into, because the motivation for your work differs depending on who you report to.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So the question is, I find it hard as a BRG leader to bridge programming to align with business needs when the company is in a struggle to engage employees overall. I mean, to me, this is an HR issue, right? So what advice would you give a BRG leader who develops programming that is more centrally focused on the employees and not essentially business focused? So I think this really boils down to how do you move the needle when your employee base is stagnant or not engaged in general? And I would have an answer for that, but you go for it.
So this is a hard one, and
Yeah.
it's a hard one for two reasons. And this is not an issue at, let me be clear before I say this. This is not an issue at the Portland Trailblazers, but in other organizations, when there is a DEI and there's an HR or people and culture or whatever, name it is, sometimes there's a huge disconnect between the two. So from a DEI lens, everybody doesn't feel that the employee engagement should fall under there, but I understand that the way and people use their voice and feel a part of the organization, that's the inclusion piece, right? So it's a push and pull, right? So how do you get HR to increase that engagement? So that's the first piece. So thinking through those different dynamics of like your HR situation and your DEI situation. The ways in which you're going to engage with your employees is first, you're going to have to identify what the barrier is for them wanting to be a part of it. Is it that, using the age example, I was at a place where all of the employee engagement things we had was golf. Now, I enjoy riding around on the cart. I am an awful golfer. And so for the younger folks, they never really wanted to participate in that because that's not their thing, right? So looking at the ways in which we're engaging, have we actually asked our employees what they want? What happens a lot of times is the further up we get up the chain, everything should be customer first, but we forget to ask the customer what their needs are. We think that we're the experts and just know what they need, and we don't ask the questions, right? And so I think one, engaging and doing the surveys and finding out what people want to do. So for instance, with my with the start of our business resource groups, the new ones, one of the questions that I asked in the beginning is I had everybody tell me what their favorite restaurants were, right? Because I know 6 months down the line, a year down the line, when I'm working with that chair on engagement opportunities, I can now tap into some things that they forgot that they even shared. And it's like, boom, here's a surprise dinner at this place, right? Well, post-COVID. But thinking through and being intentional of hearing people and the things that they say, and then coming up with something creative that's a surprise and makes them feel heard. And so I think you can engage in that place. And with the BRGs, one of the things that I have them doing is that one meeting is topic based, right? So we're going to learn, right? Let's use our pride group for an example. Ton of topics we can talk about in a pride group. Transphobia in the LGBT community, parenting and adoption. And we're fortunate, we're a state where, in terms of adoption, everything's great. Like there's second parent adoption, like we're good. But it's still like, it's a different parenting experience, right? So racism in the LGBTQ plus community, like those are the learning topics. So maybe February, let's say we learn, March, we're going to do something fun. So we're going to build in those bonding opportunities, but then we're also going to make sure that we learn. In those learning moments, that's when you're going to find out the organizational shifts that we need to make and things that people may see or may bring up that we need to shift as an organization, but then you can simultaneously build the bond at the same time. So I hope that answers the question of like how you can kind of do both. You will need to partner with your HR and really kind of talk through how can we better survey and hear what people want, and then figure out ways within budget. Like we can't take the whole team to Disney World. Like that's not gonna happen. Maybe Keisha at the Mavs because I got the money. But for everyone else, realistically, but it's doable. But you just have to have good partnerships.
That's great. Great insight. So I'm going to take us down a different road.
Okay.
Two parts of the question. Whew, we're running up on time. I'm trying to get everything in there because it's just so much good meat to the conversation.
And it's loaded questions. I'm like,
well, we're talking real stuff here,
real
right?
Stuff.
This isn't a tangential BS. We want to get into this and provide some nuggets. And from the chat, looks like people are really resonating. The things you're saying are resonating with lots of folks. So I'm going to delve into this question and I want to take it in two directions. Some of the questions we've got are around, okay, this is great work as it relates to the employees, but you know what that question is. But then up here, it still looks the same. It's not changing. They can, up here can tout, but look what we're doing. We have these BRGs and look at us and aren't we doing great things? But the leadership is still homogenous, right? Or they're not making any changes up there. So that's the first part of the question on how do you navigate that? And the second part of the question is, what's the advice for the next generation coming in of people who are different, LGBTQ, racially, Black women, right? We're talking about sports here, and we all know what the numbers are. If you don't know what the numbers are for who was in sports, go to TIDES, TIDES, look at the reports that come out of the University of Central Florida. They will tell you your grades, they will tell you your numbers. So if you don't know what you're looking at in terms of race and gender, please go to those areas and look at those reports for all the different leagues, which break down by team as well. Mm-hmm. So for the people coming in, what can they do to make a difference? And for the people up top, what can your level do to help them see the best way to move forward?
So we'll start at the top, because my motto is that DEI does not trickle up, it trickles down. I'm not going to get into Reaganomics, but I think that that's the one area where I think that is legit, that like DEI has to start from the top. The problem is that people, when we start to make these call outs about, our senior, our C-suite, senior level executive leadership is not diverse, by the time people get to those roles, they're there for a while. So there's not a lot of movement. So it's going to take a really long time for those areas to get diverse. So what you need to see that senior level start to do is be intentional with what these pipelines look like and what requirements we're having. I'm not the Rooney, we always talk about this Rooney rule thing and whether it works. This season, I think it's safe to say it definitely did not. And that juxtaposition of like looking at the Super Bowl and all of these coaches and then head coaches so the first place is the pipeline. So we need to start creating the pipeline. We think about people diversifying the top, but a lot of times people don't have those entry points. So like you and I were able to go and pick up the phone, and now it's like I get 8 requests a day on LinkedIn of like, can you talk to me about DE&I? And it's like, baby, I want to, but like, I got to help my baby with homework. And, as soon as 5:30 hits, right? So it's like not even being able to be the best mentor to all of these people. That means that these younger folks are losing their entry points, right? And I try to do the best that I can, but just being realistic, I know I'm not alone in that space. So then the organization needs to be intentional of creating entry points, accessibility options, whether it's shadowing, whether it's HBCU internships. I'm not going to call out organizations, but some organizations will hire very diverse internships and have diverse internship programs, and they only come from the Ivy League. And I'm saying this as a person that just previously worked in the Ivy League. And so now we're getting into this elitism piece, or this like perfect minority candidate, and that has to shift too. Right. So we're sitting on this call as HBCU graduates, and we've done incredibly well for ourselves, all things considered. We know the talent that exists across the United States, across universities, of diverse minority talent, whether that's the HSIs and some of our more Asian Pacific Islander universities. The talent is there. So your organization needs to create a pipeline. If it's not going to shift at the top, then when that position comes open, you need a leader that's going to say, we are going to intentionally make sure that we are interviewing diverse candidates. I am a strong believer that just if you give me the opportunity and you just let me in the door, like I'm going to get it. And there are a lot of people that have that mindset, but you just got to give us the opportunity to get through the door. So I hope that answers it a little bit, but people have to be patient. That C-suite takes a while to shift. It does. Yeah. But the pipeline will build the talent to be available for those shifts to occur 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah. Progress is a process,
yes.
Right? Isn't that what folks say?
Yes.
And again, this is not a pipeline issue.
Mm-hmm.
I think people need to understand that and not allow someone to say that.
Yeah.
And to kind of clap back if somebody says that in your organization. Well, nobody wants, no, this is not a pipeline issue. There are many ways to figure out the folks who should be in your organizations or who want to be in organizations. And is your organization one that they want to work for?
Yeah.
you and I talked about the Ivy League piece, for Black candidates. And I related a story, sometimes you see a press release come out and they'll say, oh, we hired, these Black folks or, these women or whatever to be in the organizations at the higher level. And they're proudly talking about the Ivy League work that they've done. But if they promoted, let's say if you got promoted, to chief blah, 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 would they in the press release, and probably they would because it's, your organization is progressive in this space, but would the organization say, well, Jen went to this HB, she went to Howard University, or, Melanie went to Morgan State University, because the people who are at those colleges are like, oh, I can see myself in that position.
Yeah.
But if you're only seeing a press release that says, so-and-so went to Yale or so-and-so went to, Harvard or Penn or something, then it's like, okay, well, I went to, Delaware State. I went to Bennett College in Greensboro. I don't see the person who looks like me in writing on that press release. So we've got like 3 minutes here. So why don't you, allies or mentors in your space, why don't you give us what are the things you're reading, watching, listening to that is making you smarter and making you just think. These are the nuggets that we're going to give the folks at the end to say, go on and continue to do the work. Take this forward and get better. What are you reading, watching, listening to? Who are your allies? You mentioned the NBA before earlier, and Val Ackerman back in the day.
Yeah,
Val Ackerman, she's one of my strongest mentors and just someone who I've watched her career from just way back in the day under David Stern. So why don't you leave us with some nuggets so folks can take that and be the best they can be.
So for those that are, I'm going to give 2 pieces. For those that are DEI practitioners, this is going to sound really crazy. I read 2 books at a time. So at night, I read something that is just fiction. I'm reading Song of Solomon right now by Toni Morrison. My morning book right now that actually just started this morning. And I read about 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes a night. I'm reading James Baldwin, I'm drawing a blank, the fire within, the fire something. And it's talking through, and that the James Baldwin book is pretty much like a series of letters that is taking us through like when we were really in the civil rights movement. Like if you've seen the documentary, like I'm Not Your Negro, this is like that moment in his life. And for me, I have to go back as we're in this kind of transitional phase in our country. I have to go back kind of to the roots to keep me going, because it was far more violent back then. So that's where I'm at with that. And the reason why I do that from a DEI standpoint, I have to pull myself back because this work, I see it when I turn on the news. I'm on Twitter last night. I didn't know what was going to happen with this national anthem thing. And so I'm a daughter of a military vet. So, those feelings my sister is singing the national anthem for us next week. So it's like, there are these components of like, where do you sit? Because you never get to escape DEI. So I make sure that I actually give myself some grace, and I'll read a book that gives me escapism. And that is how I like stay sane. In terms of learning, so I have read everything. I'm looking at my bookshelf from here. The Remix, that's a book focused on generational diversity. I'm a lawyer by trade, so The Color of Law, that's coming up next. I love bell hooks. Here's the foundation for me in terms of DEI. I always lead with love. I want to be love. I want to receive love. And on my dying day, I want to look back and think of all the ways in which I loved and gave love to this world. And so that's in everything that I do. So from a DEI perspective, if you really want to do this work, it is very cliche maybe to say to start with Kimberly Crenshaw and bell hooks, but bell hooks from How You Love, start with All About Love. If you've never read that, start there. And let that be the place that you start your DEI journey. So.
Yeah, well, we're always twins. We talked about that. I'm the daughter of a military child who's in the Army, who also went on to be a Black police officer for 20 years. So there's a lot of conflict.
Yeah.
When we see things like this. And so Laura and friends are putting a lot of stuff in the chat about the things that you mentioned, and just we're pulling up on 4:00 Eastern, and it's just. You and I just kicked it out, just from the very beginning. And I appreciate you taking this time. I hope that the questions were valuable to folks who joined us today. I know this is going to be kept on social and probably spread out afterwards, but it's been a pleasure speaking with you in this forum. And I just, I'm really proud of the work you do, and just, you are a wonderful example, and just doing everything that is full of love and providing value. And for me, providing value is the biggest piece too. I want to be of value to my friends, my family, and to my workplace. So Jenn, thanks for your time. Seeing some thank yous coming in. I think they'll
Congrats
probably,
to you.
oh, thanks.
On the new
New
role.
chapter.
She'll be able to announce in a week, but congratulations to you.
Thank
Exciting
you.
things.
Thank you.
Thanks to everyone, Laura, Pro Assembly, Female Quotient. This is amazing. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, ladies. This was a breath of fresh air, a lot of gems dropped. So again, thank y'all for taking time today. I know you guys are busy, so this was beautiful, honestly. The transparency was just, I loved it all. So
She and I just clicked. So this is perfect. We've never met in person, but we will as soon as we're free.
Yeah.
So
all right, everybody stay safe and be well, and follow us on Pro Sports Assembly on all platforms except for Facebook. So thank y'all again.
Thank you.
Marketing, great.
Bye.
We're hanging up. Thank you.